Hello everyone, this is the second video in the series of 3 following the first one where we learned about basic SketchUp geometry tools, the different rendering modes, how to open and save a file, and the inspection and finder tool. So in this video we will define the thermal zones and spaces for a room. And before we get started with that, you'll see that right now that my file is not saved as an OpenStudio file, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. So I'll be saving my model under the name test, and now that it's an official OpenStudio model, I will go ahead and launch the OpenStudio application with the SketchUp button. So just in a second, the application window should pop up. Cool, so yeah, we're greeted with the same interface. So now in order to define the spaces and the thermal zones, we first have to actually make them in OpenStudio. So the left-hand tabs are where you actually find this information and these places to put in the thermal zones and spaces. So here we're in the Spaces tab, and I'm just adding 2 spaces, floor 1 and floor 2. And you can change the colors if you want. It is kind of just arbitrary and based on preference. So yeah, here we just did the second floor. You can add construction sets, schedule sets, outdoor air, and loads here. So this is a very important tab that you'll be using a lot. And next, we'll do the thermal zones. So similar to the spaces, we'll have to add thermal zones. So I'm just going to name them floor 1, and then floor 2A, and then floor 2B. So an important thing here is thermal zones and spaces do not have to be one-to-one. So you don't have to have the same thermal zone for the same space. You can have, for example, 2 thermal zones in one space, which I'll be doing here and showing you guys later in this video. So we're going to save the changes we've made in the OpenStudio application, and then go back to SketchUp where we can reload those changes into our model. Right now it's blank, so we'll have to add some geometry. So like in the last video, we want to go to New Space, just place it anywhere, double click the space, and then within it I pressed R to make a rectangle, and then P to push and pull to make a room. So right now we have one room. Let's add a second one since we do have 2 spaces. And keep in mind for our spaces, it's floor 1 and floor 2. And our thermal zones is floor 1, floor 2A, and then floor 2B. So the spaces and thermal zones are not one-to-one. So right now we have 2 rooms, and we have to create a third one in order to fit our third thermal zone. So also to mention, the rendering conditions are all white just because we have yet to define them. So now we're going to make that third room for the third thermal zone. So we're going to do that by actually editing the second room, which is the second space. So we're going to just extrude it to the left to make room for the third floor. Again, new space, create a rectangle, and then just extrude it. And then for now defining the thermal zones and spaces, there are 2 ways to do this. The first way is using the inspector. So go ahead and click the first space, go to the inspector. Now we have a space type, set it as floor 1. In the OpenStudio application, we have yet to define constructions or schedules. We do have a thermal zone, so we set that as floor 1 as well. So yeah, so both the spaces and the thermal zone have been defined. Do the same exact thing for the second room. It is in floor 2 space type. And then the thermal zone, again, will be different. It will be floor 2A. And then now we can just close the inspector and then do the same exact thing for the third room. So this one, it shares the same space as floor 2, or sorry, as room 2, but it has a different thermal zone, and that thermal zone is floor 2B. So now we have 3 different thermal zones and 2 different spaces. And now when we go back to the rendering modes, you see for some of them they're still the same because we've yet to change them. But if we go to the one by space type, it's space types, there are 2 colors for the 2 spaces. And then for the thermal zones, 3 colors for the 3 spaces. And these colors were defined in the OpenStudio application. Again, it's all just preference. So now, as you see, we have the thermal zone and space for room 3. And here's the second way to define thermal zones and spaces. It's called the Set Attributes for Selected Spaces button. Right at the top, you can see here we can change spaces, building stories, construction sets, thermal zones, very similar to the inspector window. A little less flexibility and a little less editing options, but it is a lot more user-friendly and convenient. And as you see here, you can also add some building stories and add some thermal zones through this tool rather than having to go to the OpenStudio application. So at this point in the video, we will talk about boundary conditions. So going into the boundary condition rendering mode, we see that everything is defined only by the external boundary condition marked by the dark blue color. And the thing is, we don't necessarily want that because we have 3 different rooms that share 2 different walls. So we want them to have the same internal boundary conditions between each room. And to do that, we use the surface matching tool, which is a really easy tool where you can select the entire model and it finds those external boundary conditions between rooms and automatically sets them as internal boundary conditions. Now you see here, when I go back to the same room, you see the green, which indicates they are in fact internal boundary conditions, and the walls that the rooms share are marked as internal. To finish things off, I'll mention how we can add the construction set names, the schedules, and the story names to the inspector tab so we can set those to the rooms. So again, we'll launch OpenStudio. And then after a few seconds, the application is open. So yeah, this first tab is where you'll do your schedules and make your schedule sets. Right after that is the construction set tab to make the construction sets. And then this Windows space is one that we used previously where you can do your outdoor air information, and then you can designate outdoor air definitions to your rooms. And then lastly, if you go to the facility tab, this is where you can add your stories to the buildings. And that's all we have for the second video. Yeah, stay tuned for the third one where I'll talk about the extensions that the OpenStudio plugin offers and just some last minute tips and tricks when using SketchUp.